Today we're looking at a pretty mundane living room game of hide and seek, except this one ended with a man zipped inside a suitcase and a woman convicted of murder.
Yeah, it's a really heavy one today.
It is. And before we dive into the chilling video evidence of the Winter Park suitcase murder, we really need to issue a strict and necessary disclaimer.
Right, absolutely.
Because the source material for this deep dive, it contains intense, highly conflicting allegations of severe domestic abuse, violence, and some incredibly visceral details from a highly publicized murder trial.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is.
Yeah.
So we want to make it explicitly clear to you, our listener, that neither of us is taking a side here. We aren't endorsing the viewpoints of any of the individuals involved.
No, not at all.
We're simply acting as your guides, to impartially report, extract, and just analyze the factual content and the claims exactly as they're presented in the legal documents, the trial transcripts, and the articles we've sourced.
And that context is just so vital because our mission for you today is to go far beyond like the sensationalized viral headline.
Right.
We aren't just rehashing a true crime story. We're going to conduct a real psychological dissection of a deeply, deeply toxic relationship.
Yeah, we really need to dig into that.
We're going to examine the honestly bizarre legal defense strategies deployed in court and look at the stark contrast between a grieving family and a defendant's relentless search for narrative control.
So let's lay out the core subject. We are analyzing the infamous 2020 Suitcase murder out of Winter Park, Florida.
Okay.
It's about a 42-year-old man, Jorge Torres Jr. He's suffocated to death after being zipped inside a piece of luggage by his girlfriend, Sarah Boone.
Which is just terrifying to even picture.
It really is. And, as someone who naturally gravitates toward the cold, hard logic of an investigation, her initial defense just baffles me.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Right, because she claimed this was just a game of hide and seek gone wrong, and that defies, every law of physics and common sense.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, you don't accidentally zip a grown man into a suitcase, taunt him on video, go to sleep, and then wake up baffled by the consequences. It just doesn't compute.
Well, see, if you only look at the events of that single night, sure, it makes zero sense.
Right.
But from a psychological perspective, looking at the weird, undeniably dark history between these two people, that is honestly the only way to even begin to understand how a Sunday puzzle session devolved into a lethal trap.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah. To decode the crime scene, we first have to unpack the intensely illogical foundation of their relationship.
Okay, let's unpack this, because their background is essentially like a masterclass in red flags.
Oh, absolute red flags everywhere.
They had this really twisted version of a meet cute. So Sarah was going through a divorce, right? She's still living in her marital home. And one day she just walks across the street to a neighborhood bar and meets Jorge.
It was also recently divorced.
Exactly. They essentially bonded over their mutual brokenness. And eventually they move into a tiny 900-square-foot townhome together.
See, you have to picture the physical reality of that environment.
Right, it's so small.
It becomes a literal pressure cooker. You have two people who are emotionally raw, sharing a very confined space, and relying entirely on each other to cope with their respective unresolved traumas.
And relying on staggering amounts of alcohol.
Yes, that's the main factor.
The logic of their addiction is terrifying when you look at the raw physical math. The court records show they were frequently consuming 1.5-liter Magnum bottles of wine.
Which is massive.
Yeah, it's essentially 2 standard bottles in one, and they were drinking that alongside giant handles of vodka.
Wow.
And now, look at their physical size. Sarah testified she weighed between 98 and 100 pounds. Jorge weighed just 103 pounds.
That physical math is just crucial for understanding their daily reality.
It has to be. I mean, for two people of that slight physical stature to be consuming that sheer volume of alcohol, the physiological mechanisms dictate that they were spending days at a time entirely debilitated.
Oh, absolutely.
We aren't talking about getting a little tipsy. We're talking about operating at a level of severe baseline neurological impairment.
And what's fascinating here is how that constant state of severe impairment fueled their cycle of mutual horrific abuse.
Yeah, it really
It is
escalated.
like a psychological thriller playing out in real life. When you introduce that much alcohol into a trauma-bonded relationship, you get something called alcohol myopia.
Alcohol myopia.
Yeah, the brain's executive functioning essentially just shuts down.
Oh, I see.
You can no longer process long-term consequences or complex emotions. You only react to the most immediate, volatile triggers in your environment.
Which completely explains the endless cycle of police intervention.
Exactly.
Because, according to the records, there were deep mutual allegations of violence. Jorge had 4 separate battery arrests during their 3.5-year relationship.
4 arrests, that's a lot.
Right. And yet, every single time, Sarah bailed him out.
Well, that is the textbook definition of a trauma bond.
Yeah.
The relationship basically operates on a chemical roller coaster of tension, then explosive violence, and then the honeymoon phase of reconciliation.
And the bailing out is the reconciliation.
Yes, bailing him out was part of that phase. The intermittent reinforcement of affection after violence creates this psychological dependency that can honestly be stronger than the alcohol itself.
But, she wasn't just a passive participant in the legal system either. Sarah had a record, too.
She did, yeah.
She was arrested in July 2018 for battery by strangulation against Jorge.
Strangulation? Wow.
Yeah. Her claim was that she was just fighting back, that Jorge had pinned her down and stomped on her face, and she grabbed his neck solely to get him off of her.
The specific claims of trauma that Sarah brought up during the trial, they just paint a harrowing picture of their daily life.
It's so dark.
She testified that Jorge once slapped a hot bowl of soup completely out of her hands, causing severe second-degree burns on her thigh. And another time, she claimed that over a steak dinner she had cooked for him, he became enraged and actually stabbed her in the leg with a steak knife.
Right. I read the hospital reports for that incident. When she went in, bleeding profusely, she completely lied to the medical staff.
Oh, she did?
Yeah, she told the doctors they were sword fighting with steak knives.
Sword fighting?
Sword fighting. She fabricated a bizarre story entirely to protect him from getting arrested.
See, she was insulating her abuser, which is incredibly common in these weird, toxic dynamics.
Yeah, it really seems like it.
Victims often fear retaliation, or they fear the ultimate loss of the relationship, so they act as a shield between the abuser and the authorities. But perhaps the most psychologically cruel allegation was how Jorge allegedly weaponized her pets.
Oh, the dogs. This part is awful.
It is. Sarah had 2 dogs, a blind Boston Terrier named Penny and a deaf one named Tess. She testified that Jorge would intentionally leave the yard gate open and threaten to drown the blind dog.
Just unimaginably cruel.
Or he'd tell Sarah he hoped she would find the deaf dog's body scraped off the street.
It's just pure chaos. It's like they were stuck in a Chinese finger trap.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
The harder they fought against each other, the tighter the dynamic locked them together. I mean, from the outside, the logical question is always, well, why not just walk out the door?
Right. That's what everyone asks.
But their mutual dependency made relaxing and walking away completely impossible. Like, they were 2 people trapped in a burning building, but instead of looking for the exit, they just kept arguing over who started the fire.
That's exactly it. That trauma strips away your ability to see the exit door at all. And that locked-in dynamic directly sets the stage for the claustrophobic nightmare of February 23, 2020.
I want to pause there and actually look at the meticulous timeline of that Sunday.
Yeah, do it.
Because it reads like a boring, idyllic suburban weekend. They wake up, they clean the house together. At exactly 12:10 p.m., they take Sarah's car to Publix and buy a 1.5-liter bottle of wine.
The first bottle of the day?
Right. They come home, drink, and sit down to do a 1,000-piece puzzle. And by the way, the puzzle was missing exactly 1 piece.
Oh, wow. It's almost too on the nose as a dark metaphor for this entire case.
It really is.
They're painting, listening to music, dancing with Penny and Tess in the living room. That sounds peaceful, right?
Yeah, it does.
But beneath the surface, they're consuming immense amounts of alcohol, essentially loading the gun for the evening.
Because around 5:30 p.m., Jorge takes the car back to Publix and buys another massive bottle.
So that's 3 liters of wine between 2 tiny people.
Exactly. And by 11:00 p.m., they are highly intoxicated, looking for something to do, and a drunken game of hide-and-seek begins. Sarah goes upstairs to hide in the shower. Jorge stays downstairs.
And when Sarah finally comes downstairs, she sees Jorge climbing into this old, broken blue suitcase at the bottom of the stairs.
Just a random suitcase.
Yeah, it was a piece of luggage they had actually set aside to donate to Goodwill. He climbs inside and she zips it shut. And initially, they're both laughing. It's a joke. But then the psychological tone of the room completely inverts.
And here's where it gets really interesting and deeply disturbing.
Yeah.
The police extracted 2 videos from Sarah's phone that she recorded that night. The first video starts at 11:12 p.m. and runs for about 2 minutes.
Okay.
Jorge is zipped entirely inside the luggage, and you can hear him desperately pleading, explicitly stating that he can't breathe.
And Sarah isn't laughing anymore. The dynamic shifts from a game to an exertion of absolute control.
It's chilling.
She begins taunting him. She says, "That's what you do when you choke me." She says, "That's what I feel like when you cheat on me."
Just throwing it all back at him.
She uses his literal physical confinement as a pulpit to air her grievances from years of their toxic history.
But then there is an 11-minute gap in the recordings.
Right, the gap.
At 11:23 p.m., a second video is captured. It's just 22 seconds long. Jorge is barely audible at this point, just faintly calling her name, Sarah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you witness a staggering power inversion here.
Oh, so?
You have a woman who claims she lived in constant paralyzing terror of this man, who suddenly finds herself holding all the cards. The suitcase completely neutralized her perceived threat.
Right, he's totally trapped.
But instead of unzipping it or simply walking out the front door to safety, she stayed. She stayed to actively inflict the exact kind of helplessness she claimed to feel every day.
But when we look at how this played out in a courtroom, her defense strategy takes this a step further, and the logic just entirely collapses.
Oh, the courtroom claims her something else.
Sarah's ultimate legal defense was self-defense.
Self-defense from a man in a suitcase.
Yes. She claimed that during that unrecorded 11-minute gap between the videos, Jorge pushed his hand through the broken zipper and threatened to end her.
Okay.
So what is her response? She grabs a baseball bat, beats his exposed hand, and uses the bat to poke the suitcase to force him back inside.
Wait, she used a bat.
A baseball bat. Her defense relied on the assertion that she was terrified he would break out of this flimsy, broken suitcase and kill her in the living room.
Okay, let's unpack that logic.
Right. Put yourself in the jury box for a second. You're asked to believe that a 103-pound man, severely intoxicated, zipped inside a piece of luggage, somehow poses an imminent physical threat that requires you to beat his hand with a baseball bat.
It just doesn't make sense.
Even if his hand slips out, the physics of him leveraging his way out of that zipper while drunk are incredibly low.
Yeah, the leverage just isn't there.
And more importantly, if you are truly terrified for your life in that moment, why do you then turn off the lights, go upstairs, get into bed, and go to sleep until the next afternoon?
Exactly. That massive contradiction is the exact tension of the trial, which finally took place in October 2024.
Right.
Sarah's defense attorney, James Owens, heavily utilized the battered spouse syndrome defense.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, the mechanics of this defense require proving that the defendant's actions were a panicked, conditioned trauma response. The defense narrative tried to map her actions to this syndrome by arguing she left him in the suitcase because she was paralyzed by the overwhelming conditioned fear that if she let him out, he would make good on his threats.
But the prosecution, led by William J., they clinically dismantled that logic.
I mean, they had to.
They didn't even need to argue the psychology, they just used the timeline.
Right, the timeline of the videos.
You cannot claim you walked away out of blind, paralyzing fear when you actively stood over him, pulled out your phone, framed a shot, filmed him, taunted him with highly specific past grievances, beat his hand with a bat to keep him trapped, and then casually went to sleep for over 12 hours.
Yeah, you can't.
You didn't flee a threat. You maintained absolute, deliberate control over a captive.
And this raises an important question about how trauma is presented and sometimes weaponized in our courtrooms. Battered spouse syndrome is a very real, very tragic psychological state. But can a defendant successfully claim they are the ultimate victim of that syndrome while simultaneously acting as the calculated executioner in that specific moment?
Well, the jury clearly felt she crossed the line from justifiable fear into malicious false imprisonment and murder.
Yeah, they did.
They took less than 2 hours to completely reject her self-defense claim and find her guilty of second-degree murder.
Less than 2 hours. Wow. But, you know, the emotional climax of this entire legal battle didn't actually happen at the verdict. It happened at her sentencing in December 2024.
The impact statements.
Yes. We have to contrast Sarah's relentless claims of being the ultimate victim with the devastating reality faced by Jorge's family. During the victim impact statements, Jorge's mother and his daughter confronted Sarah in court.
That must have been intense.
And in a stunning, almost incomprehensible display of grace, his mother looked directly at the judge and stated that she doesn't even hate Sarah for killing her son.
Which is incredible considering the circumstances.
It really is.
Meanwhile, Sarah's reaction to the trial ending in a life sentence wasn't a moment of clarity or closure. Her bizarre quest to control her own narrative was honestly just ramping up.
Because for someone who has completely insulated themselves in a specific reality, accepting the finality of a jury's verdict means acknowledging their own guilt.
Right.
And her psyche just refuses to do that.
I have to highlight the sheer absurdity of her legal representation throughout this process. As someone who appreciates an orderly, investigative, and legal process, this case is a logistical nightmare.
Oh, it was a mess.
How does a defendant legally stall a trial for over 4 years? Sarah went through eight different court-appointed attorneys before the trial even started.
Well, the mechanics of firing a public defender aren't simple. You can't just say you don't like them.
No, you have to have a reason.
You have to file motions claiming they are providing ineffective counsel. And Sarah was notoriously difficult to work with. She was constantly questioning their legal strategies, refusing to accept their assessments of the evidence, and writing endless letters to the court complaining about them.
And the judge is stuck, right?
Right. The judge is legally bound to ensure competent counsel, so this creates a revolving door that paradoxically allows the defendant to indefinitely stall the system.
It got to the point where she was essentially representing herself pro se and actually drew a handwritten flyer to advertise for a new lawyer.
A handwritten flyer, that's just wild.
That is how James Owens ended up taking the case. And before trial, she outright rejected a 15-year plea deal for manslaughter.
She rejected a plea deal.
She actively chose to roll the dice on a murder charge because she really believed she could convince a jury she was right. And now, post-conviction, she is currently filing motions complaining about her 13th attorney, her appellate lawyer.
It's a profound compulsion for control.
It really is.
And you see the inner workings of this most clearly in the letters she writes to the judge. After the trial, she wrote a staggering 58-page handwritten letter.
58 pages.
58 pages, followed by another post-sentencing letter to Judge Michael Cranick. In these documents, she flatly declares, "I'm not a murderer, I'm a survivor."
Wow.
She decries what she calls his corrupt court and his malevolent judicial grip.
So, what does this all mean? We're looking at a defendant who literally has video evidence recorded on her own phone of herself laughing and taunting a dying man as he begs for air.
Yeah.
Yet she has completely insulated herself in a psychological bubble where she is the ultimate victim. In her mind, her actions were entirely legally and morally justified.
It is a profound clash of realities. She survived a documented, highly toxic relationship, yes.
Right.
But she cannot reconcile the fact that her chosen method of survival in that specific moment was murder. The tragedy here operates like the ultimate locked room mystery, except the room was a piece of luggage. Two broken people found each other, locked themselves in a toxic cycle of chemical dependency and abuse, and it ended in asphyxiation on a Sunday night.
The cold, hard logic of the evidence remains undefeated. You cannot lock someone in a suitcase, film them begging for air, beat their hand with the bat, go to sleep, and successfully argue self-defense.
No, you really can't.
The defense's math simply does not add up, no matter how many pages you write to the judge.
It really doesn't. But, as we wrap up this deep dive into the Winter Park suitcase murder, there is a lingering thought about the very systems we have in place to handle these highly complex, psychologically messy cases.
Yeah, especially when you look at the sheer amount of resources spent here. I mean, the delays, the hearings, the attorneys.
Exactly. Does the legal system structure, which absolutely must guarantee due process, of course, but does it also allow for endless pro se motions? The cycling through 13 different attorneys and reams of handwritten manifestos submitted to the court?
It's a valid question.
Does it inadvertently provide a taxpayer-funded stage for convicted individuals to continue controlling the narrative?
Right.
Does the architecture of our justice system sometimes allow them to manipulate the process and demand center stage long after the jury has spoken? It's definitely something for you to mull over the next time you see a sensational trial unfold in the headlines.